This past week was Rosh Chodesh for the month of Cheshvan. Now, the traditional Hebrew name for the month of Cheshvan is Mar Cheshvan. The reason is that it's the bitter month of Cheshvan is that there are no holidays in it. There's not a single Jewish holiday. Just as a side note, rabbis and cantors don't really look at it as Mar Cheshvan. It's a month of joy, a month of happiness. Exactly, after all of the fall holidays that we have. But there is a holiday in the secular calendar that falls during this month, this time of year. And that holiday is? Remembrance Day. That is true. That is also true. But as most people shouted out, it's true, right? Wisdom of crowds. Most people got the answer right, except for my fellow clergy that are in the room. It's Halloween. And Halloween is something that isn't spoken about often in Jewish context, but I wanted to take a look at it today a bit. At a question that I think most Jews, especially in the non-Orthodox world, have asked at some point or another. Jews living in North America, where Halloween has become such a central part of the ethos of our society. The question of, can Jews celebrate Halloween? Now, the first answer to that is the easiest answer. No, you can't. The Torah is clear. We're not supposed to participate in foreign holidays and holidays that are connected to other religious customs and religious traditions. And while Halloween today is fairly secular, it has religious origins. It's believed to originate in the ancient Celtic religion, practiced in Britain and Ireland long ago. Later, when the Romans conquered the Celts, they added their own festivals and religious practices to that day. And then even later in the 7th century, the Pope moved All Saints' Day to November 1st. It had only been established actually the year prior, happening in the springtime. But for its second time, it was moved to November 1st, and that was a hallowed day, a holy day, which led to All Hallows' Eve, or Halloween. But by the Middle Ages, the religious and secular customs of the holiday had really merged together in different ways. So yes, Halloween has religious origins, but by and large today, it's not a religious holiday. It's a very secular holiday. In fact, it's been that way for a fairly long time. After the Reformation in England, the Protestants no longer celebrated the religious nature of the day, but they incorporated new traditions, keeping it as part of the culture and society. Some of the early settlers to America, who also didn't observe the religious aspects of the holiday, incorporated other customs and rituals as part of their new culture and society. So while Halloween has religious origins, I think saying that it's a foreign holiday from a religious aspect isn't really fair. While Judaism forbids observing non-Jewish customs, much of halakha is meant to reserve the unique aspects of Jewish belief and practice. So it's easy from that point of view to say that it's forbidden. We cannot celebrate Halloween. But at the same time, I don't find that persuasive. The Halloween of today is almost totally removed from the religious context of the past. Kids aren't looking to go out and help ferry lost souls to the other world, as done on Samhain. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. Or offering worship to Pomona, the goddess of harvest in the Roman religion. Halloween has religious origins, but I don't think that's enough to say it's prohibited for a Jew to go trick-or-treating. In fact, many Jewish holidays, many Jewish customs have been adapted and taken from other religious cultures and societies. The Passover Seder is heavily influenced by the Greek Symposium. Sukkot shares an interesting history with a pagan harvest festival that was practiced in ancient Babylonia. And even the different minhagim and customs between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, when you look at them, they're based on what were the accepted societal norms in the different culture, the different faiths, the different communities that the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic Jewish communities lived in. So we have a long history of doing things that have a non-Jewish origin. So the real question then is, should Jews celebrate Halloween? And one answer to that question is no. Halloween is about ghosts, it's about demons, it's about witches, it's about things that are absolutely not Jewish. And from that perspective, it's an easy answer, and it's the right answer. We learn in Exodus, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. In Leviticus, you shall not use enchantment. Also in Leviticus, a man or a woman that has a familiar spirit, right, that talks to ghosts, or is a wizard, shall be put to death. In Deuteronomy, there shall not be found among you anyone who uses divination, an observer of times, an enchanter, a witch, a charmer, a consulter of spirits, a wizard, a necromancer, ghosts, witch, monsters. These are all things that the Torah explicitly forbids. They're things that are explicitly not Jewish. So what's the easy answer then? Should Jews celebrate Halloween? No. But then what happens when we read through our tradition? Later on in Tanakh, even though it tells us in Shemot and Exodus you shouldn't have witches, King Saul goes ahead and sees a witch. Why does he see a witch? To speak to the spirit, the ghost of the prophet Samuel. Now, to be fair, the tradition doesn't condone that. Samuel's not very happy with King Saul for this, and things don't end very well for King Saul. But we can find other examples in our tradition. In the Talmud, there are multiple stories about ghosts. There are stories about demons. It's actually one story, which I love in Masechet Brachot, is about a man who spends the night in the graveyard. He's having a fight with his wife, so he goes and spends the night in the graveyard. And he hears two ghosts talking. And he learns that there's going to be a flood or excessive rainfall, and it's going to kill all the crops of people that plant after the first rain. So what does he do? He plants in the second rain. And all of his crops survive, while everyone else's crops don't do so well. The next year, he decides on his own he's going to go sleep in the graveyard. It worked out well for him now, so he goes again. This time he goes and he hears that the first people that plant in the second season, there'll be a plague, a blight, that will wipe out their crops. So instead he plants after the first rain. And again, his crops succeed where others do not. There's another story about a rabbi witnessing a wedding party where people were being so frivolous, they were being so joyous, they were having fun, and they weren't thinking about Torah. And one of the teachings in the Talmud is that when your thoughts are on Torah, it protects you from the demons that are trying to creep up to you. The Midrash on how King David finally died at such an old age was they were able to distract him from his thoughts of Torah, and that finally allowed these demons to take him. But so what does this rabbi do at the wedding party when he sees the demons creeping up to everyone? He takes a cup, 400 zuzim, an expensive cup. Remember, a goat from Passover is only 2 zuzim. So 400 zuzim, that's a lot of goats. And he smashes that cup to get everyone's attention, to draw them away from their frivolity and to bring them back to thoughts of Torah and save them. Sounds familiar, right? We do something similar in weddings today, but for different reasons. We've taken aside the spiritual, the fantastical part of that teaching, and we've incorporated it as a remembrance of the temple. We've given it Jewish meaning and Jewish significance. And there are other stories about ghosts and demons. Kabbalah is full of various spells, various ways of talking to spirits, all sorts of things that were very common in the Middle Ages. Lastly, I think one of the most famous stories, while we don't have a monster like Frankenstein in the Jewish tradition, although Frankenstein, one could assert, might have been Jewish. He was a doctor too, after all, right? The monster was not Frankenstein. But there is a Jewish monster. There's the famous story of the Golem, the protector of the Jewish community of Prague, the Rabbi, the Maharal of Prague would summon, raised up to protect them. So there are stories and concepts in the Jewish tradition about ghosts and witches, demons and spirits and monsters. There is a Jewish side to all of that. So what does that mean then when it comes to Halloween? Should Jews celebrate Halloween? Well, one answer is Halloween's about fear. And that's not a very Jewish concept. The idea of trying to scare people, trying to find an experience that scares you and makes you afraid. Judaism is about community. It's about hope. It's about justice. These are Jewish values. Fear, anxiety, that adrenaline rush from a haunted house, those aren't Jewish values. But what then do we make of Halloween today? So the first thing I want to go back to is the idea of taking things from other cultures. Judaism has always done it. In fact, the American Jewish historian Gershon Cohen, he referred provocatively to the blessing of assimilation in Jewish history. Right? To any Jewish parent or grandparent, we hear the word assimilation and it terrifies us. But he referred to the blessing of assimilation in Jewish history. And what did he mean by that? He argued that Judaism would long ago have disappeared from the world stage, from the history books, like every other ancient culture and society and religion, except that in each age, in each society, it adapted. It brought in new ideas from the surrounding culture, and it made them Jewish in some way. A better term than assimilation might be cultural or acculturation, bringing in these other cultures, making them Jewish in some way. In fact, we see that with what we read today from the story of Noah. I remember in university taking a Hebrew Scriptures course and being shocked to learn that this isn't the only story of a flood. And when I learned about the other stories about floods in ancient Near Eastern societies, the Mesopotamian story, the Akkadian story, and various other ones, I remember Chabad.org taught me that it's good proof. These are other societies that remember the flood of Noah. It's proof in the truth of the Torah. But I don't want to talk about the truth of the Torah or the divine authorship of it. I want to focus for a bit from looking at it from the secular perspective, the way it's studied in universities. The Noah story, the flood story, happens in the Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia, or the ancient Akkadian, the Epic of, again, I'm going to butcher the name probably, Atrahasis. And for the sake of things, let's say these were adapted by the biblical authors. What can we learn from that? Well, the story of Atrahasis is about humanity serving God. The gods bring a flood because of overpopulation. There are too many people, and they're bothering the gods. They've gotten too noisy. So the flood comes to wipe them out, and afterwards, even though there are fewer of them, to prevent them from having so many, different things are put in place to limit human population. What happens after Noah, though? The same command from Bereshit, go forth and multiply, to fill the earth. So if you accept the idea that our story is taken from, but re-Jewified, Judaized, however we want to call it, I don't know what the technical term would be, since I made it up, but taking a Jewish lesson and placing it into that story, reincorporating it, it becomes not something about humanity bothering the gods, about there being too many people, but instead it's a story about ethics and morality. The Jewish version is a story about filling the world and creating an ethical society, one where human beings have a special distinction from animals, that we can see the difference from right and wrong. We can recognize it, that we can choose our actions. So the question again, should Jews celebrate Halloween? The answer to that is, I think it's a decision parents have to make for their own families, for their own kids. But the idea that it's absolutely forbidden, that it's wrong to celebrate it, I think that's outdated, especially in the context of communities where we live in a larger secular society, where we live in a larger ethos. I remember hearing a story once about someone who went to a rabbi's sukkah in Israel, and it was a Haredi rabbi who didn't interact much with the outside world and was very excited by the new decorations that he was able to find. And what were the decorations? Christmas lights. Even a whimsical rabbi dressed in a red suit. It's probably an apocryphal story, but it's humorous that idea. For most of us, putting up Christmas decorations would be assimilation. For someone who knew nothing about Christmas or Christmas lights or Santa Claus, they became, in this story, whether true or not, Jewish objects for ritual. So one of my own teachers, Rabbi Ed Feinstein, talks about Halloween. And years ago, he spoke about something remarkable that happens on it. Something he says he wants his kids to see. On Halloween, we open our homes to one another. On Halloween, we come out from behind our solid core doors and deadbolt locks, our electronic burglar alarms. The doorbell is met not with a gruff, "Who's there?" Not with a suspicious eye peering through a peephole, but with smiles and sweets. On Halloween, and only on Halloween, we pretend we are a neighborhood again. Families from disparate backgrounds who share common civic values, making their life together in a common space. So from that aspect, I think there is something Jewish to be said of Halloween. We live in scary times. In the decades since Rabbi Feinstein gave that sermon, the world has only gotten scarier. We're witnessing the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion, headlines about the possibilities of a nuclear war. It's terrifying. We're witnessing our own problems locally. We're witnessing problems around the world. Crimes increasing. Anti-Semitism seems to be on the front page week after week. We're coming now out of a pandemic where people were afraid not only of being near strangers, but being near their family, their friends. I spoke earlier that Judaism isn't about being afraid. Judaism is about justice. It's about hope. It's about community. And there is something, I think, to be said about what Rabbi Feinstein takes away from Halloween. A day when we go out of our homes. A day when someone knocks on our door and we open it with a smile. A day when we can knock on our neighbor's door and participate in a larger community. I remember living in Israel in a very Shabbat-observant community, how nice it was. These people would just knock on your door on Shabbat. They couldn't call, you couldn't call them, you would just knock on their door. And it was fine. You were welcomed in, or you welcomed people in. It was a nice surprise. Today, when was the last time someone dropped by unannounced? And if they did, for most of us, would it really be welcome? There's something special about a day where you can go and be a part of a community, when you can knock on people's doors, when you open yours and welcome them. So I'm not saying that you should celebrate Halloween if you don't. But I'm saying we should maybe be a little lighter on those who do. Because there are many in our communities that celebrate it. This rabbi included. Shabbat Shalom.